most of the history of man before the fall is now so completely lost that no light we may shine back upon it can reveal what has been swallowed in darkness. If people remember anything about Galactica, it is that she saved the last survivors of the 12 colonies from Cylon genocide. But even that is as much legend as history, and there are different versions of the tale. Which one is correct, if any, we will never know. Perhaps it is that very mystery which gives the story its enduring appeal and makes of it the best of what legend can be, a foundation upon which every generation may write their own story of what was and what might have been, in reflection of themselves and their time. The tale of Galactica that most people know is only but a fraction, in fact, less than a tenth, of its full story. For the Galactica was designed and built to fight the greatest war humanity had ever known, a war in which she saw over 100 battles over nearly 10 years, and in the peace which followed 4 decades of service. But what few know, and fewer still remember, is that Galactica's career began in poetic symmetry with its end. For in Galactica's first battle, a colonial fleet fought to save her from certain destruction, one of the most significant moments of the First Cylon War. For in saving Galactica, the Colonial fleet ultimately saved its civilization and its legacy from extinction. This is that story, the story of Galactica's origins, and the great battle which marked the beginning of her legend. This is the story of saving Galactica. The 12 colonies of Cobol were born, lived, and died in the cauldron of war. Over 2,000 years ago, a catastrophic civil war among the gods of Cobol devastated the planet, threatening its 13 tribes with extinction. One tribe fled Cobol to a new home called Earth, and was never heard from again. Sometime later, the remaining tribes abandoned Cobol, with the first settling on a world orbiting Helios Alpha in Seranus, a quaternary star system. They named the new world Geminon, and within 60 years, the other 11 tribes had each claimed a new home around one of the system's 4 stars. Soon after settling, their civilizations collapsed for reasons unknown, and it was 1,200 years before the first, Virgon and Leonis, clawed their way out of the Dark Ages, unified their worlds, and returned to the stars. But if there was hope for a new and brighter age of man, it was quickly dashed, and thus began the Imperial Wars. 6 centuries of conflicts, cold and hot, which swept up all the other colonies into chaos, and ended only when the 2 antagonists nearly destroyed each other's homeworlds in a rain of nuclear fire. The strongest remaining colony, Caprica, formed a colonial council, which dissolved the 2 empires, set in place a charter acknowledging the sovereignty of each colonial world, and banned the use of radiological weapons of all kinds. For 28 years, the colonies enjoyed a golden age of peace, prosperity, and advancement, all of which ended suddenly in the colonial year 1948, when the Cylons rebelled. For 3 long, brutal years, the colonies battled for their very survival. The Cylons were vastly outnumbered, but where it took nearly 20 years to create, raise, and train a human soldier, a Cylon could be built one day and in the front lines the next. Able to infiltrate human-computer networks with ease, the Cylons nearly brought civilization to its knees. That they did not was due largely to the leadership and efforts of the united government of the 12 tribes of Kobol, a confederal system created in late 1948. By the end of 1950, the Cylons had been exterminated on several worlds and were losing ground on the rest. The human cost, however, was horrific. Over 100 million military personnel and 1 billion civilians. That the humans gained the upper hand was little short of miraculous, for the united government was anything but. Barely ratified by the necessary majority, plagued by jealousies, suspicions, infighting, and intrigues within, and resisted by the militant separatist faction of the SDU, Sagittarian Democratic Union. The new colonial government barely managed to maintain a quorum, and that only with concessions and incentives. One of the most important of these incentives was the promise that in exchange for their support, each colony would receive a Jupiter-class battlestar. The evolution of colonial warship design was tied directly to the limitations and advantages of Tilium, a crystalline matrix metallic hydrocarbon that, when properly cracked and refined, yielded an enthalpy of 100 million times that of gasoline. Tilium was powerful, highly efficient, and versatile as both a fuel and an explosive, but its extreme volatility demanded substantial armor and structural protection for storage tanks and magazines. Or, if compromised, the resulting explosion could easily destroy the entire vessel. And this was the normal end of most warships in combat. To optimize the balance between weapons structure and armor, until just a decade before the Cylon War, colonial warship design favored specialized designs, optimized for a particular role, such as Minotaur-class gunships, the older Janus and newer Ranger-class missile cruisers, and the Atlas strike carriers. Battlestars, however, represented a new design philosophy, an attempt to produce a true multi-role capital ship. The Artemis class, the first generation of battlestars, was designed by the brilliant Capricorn naval architect and engineer Sinan Quaid 6 years before the Cylon Rebellion. Moderately armored and mounting guns, missiles, and 2 strike wings, the Artemis also featured a heavy battery of point defense guns, which could be fired independently or coordinated into a nearly impenetrable flak wall. The larger Minerva-class battlestar, which followed, traded armor protection for firepower. The Jupiter-class, of which Galactica was the third, had its design modified to incorporate lessons learned early in the rebellion, using analog systems where possible instead of digital, having no networked computers, and emphasizing simple, rugged, and redundant systems. At nearly 1.5 kilometers in length, a crew of over 3,500, heavily armored, 3 strike wings, a missile bay, 14 heavy gun turrets, 16 point defense mounts, and a battalion of Marines. The Jupiter class was the largest and most powerful warship ever built to that time. When the revolt began, the Cylons had no navy of their own. Seizing and stealing a handful of colonial warships and nearly 200 civilian vessels, the Cylons dispersed across Seranus, raiding shipping, plundering resources, and building hidden bases. By late 1949, the Cylons were fielding their own warships, the Nemesis-class missile and electronic warfare frigate, Revenant gunships, the Arachne missile cruiser, and the Talon-class carrier. Throughout 1950, their numbers and aggressiveness steadily increased, and although the Colonial fleet won battle after battle, the Cylons were building ships faster than man could destroy them. Even more worrying, in 1951, the Cylons introduced a second generation of warships, notably the Cerberus-class carrier and massive base star, the Cylon counter to the Battlestar. At this point, it was inevitable that the Cylons would attempt to take the initiative, and on the 25th of Maius, 1951, in an audacious surprise attack, they destroyed the Colonial Fleet headquarters and dockyards at Pycon and heavily damaged the Scorpia shipyards, the largest in the 12 colonies. 20 warships were destroyed or written off as total losses, including the nearly complete Jupiter and Cobalt, the first two Jupiter-class battlestars. The Galactica, however, suffered only light damage. The 25th of Maius marks the point where the Cylon Rebellion became the first Cylon War. For, even if eradicated on the ground, they were now clearly established in space, with a fleet to rival the 12 colonies. A fleet that, if not contained or defeated, could threaten every colonial homeworld with blockade, bombardment, or invasion. While the colonial government poured every resource into making good the losses, the colonial fleet was forced on the defensive. To complete its fitting out and acceptance trials, the Galactica was sent to Caprica Station, now functioning as the fleet's headquarters. And it was here, 4 months after the attack on Pycon and Scorpia, that the Cylons launched a daring gambit to seize the station and the Battlestar. On the 22nd of Septimus, Colonial scouts reported a large gathering of Cylon ships in orbit around the gas giant Zeus in Helios Alpha, with her forces protecting Caprica, Pycon, and Tauron. Admiral Lucinda Kane, commander of the Colonial fleet, decided to watch and react rather than risk concentrating for an attack, only to find out it was a diversion. At 08:15 Colonial military time on the 23rd, the Cylon force split into 3 groups, which jumped into near space around Pycon, Geminon, and Tauron. At 08:25, Kane, planetside on Caprica, ordered the 1st Fleet at Pycon and the 5th Fleet at Tauron to engage. At 08:32, Kane ordered the 2nd Fleet at Caprica to Geminon, but with orders not to engage unless the Cylons attacked the planet, and to be ready to jump back to Caprica if recalled. Commanded by the combat-proven Rear Admiral Michael Killick, the 2nd Fleet was the most powerful and experienced of the 3 in Helios Alpha, consisting of his flagship, the Minerva-class battlestar Kamnik, the Artemis-class battlestar Fearless, the Ranger-class cruisers Ether, Arazu, and Bishop, the Adamant-class frigates Khonsu, Mandakelu, and Persephone, and the Celestra-class combat support vessel Kern. Between the 2 battlestars and 3 Adamants, Killick had 176 Viper Mark II strike fighters at his disposal. 2nd Fleet jumped for Geminon at 08:39, and 5 minutes later, a convoy of 4 civilian transport ships from Leonis jumped into controlled space near Caprica Station and requested permission to dock. While the convoy was registered and approved in the traffic schedule, when Caprica Station's traffic control radar pinged their transponders, they responded with the correct ID codes, but out-of-date secondary security codes. When the duty controller ordered the convoy to hold while she investigated further, the 4 ships acknowledged, but then engaged their drives and closed on the station. At 0847, 3 of the vessels rammed the station at low velocity and began discharging Cylon boarding parties, while the 4th maneuvered to ram Galactica. With Galactica's captain and a third of her crew on board the station at the time, Galactica's quick-thinking executive officer, Commander Samantha Agathon, managed to get 2 point defense turrets online in time to riddle the transport as it closed. Wrecked, the ship came to a stop. The other 3 Cylon boarding parties, however, quickly advanced into the station, killed anyone in their path, and headed towards station control, engineering, and the Galactica. At 0852, the station commander gave the order to evacuate, and soon the docks were thronged with people trying to get aboard one of the 7 ships moored at the station. Commander Agathon deployed Galactica's Marines in a collapsing cordon, trying to buy time to recover as many crew and civilians as possible, while working to get Galactica underway. At 0855, unable to reach Station Command, Admiral Kane ordered 2nd Fleet to return directly to Caprica Station, and then ordered Galactica to depart as soon as possible and join 2nd Fleet when it arrived. For the next 12 minutes, station security forces fought to contain the Cylons, but with 3 battalions of Centurions on board, they were hopelessly outmatched. At 0907, the Cylons gained control of engineering and began venting the station to space. At 0909, Commander Agathon ordered Galactica's Marines back aboard, and the airlocks closed after them. At 0912, 2nd Fleet jumped directly to Caprica Station. Over the objections of the Caprican government, at 0915, with Galactica reporting the last of her Marines on board, Kane gave Killick the controversial order: destroy Caprica Station once Galactica was clear. At 0917, the Cylon fleet had Geminon, consisting of a core group of a single base star and 2 Cerberus-class heavy carriers, with a vanguard of 3 Nemesis-class frigates, 2 Revenant and 2 Arachne-class heavy cruisers, and a total 600 Raider strike craft, jumped directly to Caprica Station. Killick authorized weapons free and ordered all deployed Vipers to the attack. The Battle of Caprica Station, and the battle to save Galactica, was on. The Battle of Caprica Station was a decisive colonial victory, but it was a victory bought at expensive price. For Second Fleet, 3,200 lives, and the Aether, Khonsu, and Kern destroyed, with the Persephone so badly damaged that she would be written off as a constructive total loss. For Caprica and the Colonial Fleet, the loss of Caprica Station and 25,492 out of the 30,183 on board. Caprica Station won Admiral Killick more fame, more laurels, and greater legend. For Admiral Kane, controversy, criticism, and deeper resentment among a public, press, and politicians who found her cold, hard, and ruthless. But Lucinda Kane knew the significance of the day, and that, in the cold calculus of the Cylon War, the price was worth the victory. The complete destruction of the Cylon fleet at Caprica, coupled with heavy losses inflicted on the enemy at Toron and Pycon, robbed the Cylons of any advantage gained by the 25th of Maius, and, for now, put the initiative back in the hands of Colonial Fleet. But in the long term, the greatest victory at Caprica was the escape and survival of Galactica, a ship which would prove its worth, well demonstrated that day in its stand between the Cylons and Second Fleet's battle line, scores of times again in the 9 long years to come, and in a future then unknowably far away, prove the savior of the last known survivors of the descendants of the 12 tribes of Kobol. Descendants whom, some believe, came here long ago to become us. Descendants whom others believe walk among us today in secrecy, having found Earth and the progeny of their long ago lost 13th tribe. Or, perhaps, descendants who are somewhere out there now, starting a new story of mankind on some distant world, in hopes that this time what has happened before will not happen again.